Well, hello and welcome to the old garage number 54. I'm Wild Bill, and you know the routine. We got questions, we got answers, we got silliness, got a shout out. So let's get her going on. Now, the first question we have came from actually the last special, which was the top 10, people of early car history. And actually a lot of people were just talking about that they would have wanted to see Rene Panhard, Citroën. There was other people that they said, hey, should have been on that list. And you know what? First of all, hey, it was my list. but really, when I was just painting with such a broad stroke, I mean, maybe doing, top 10 American to top 10 British, top 10 French, top 10 Italian, top 10 German, etc. might be good. Or maybe the top 10 engineers for, since, on the list I gave, I mean, not all of them were engineers. Some were, innovators in other ways. Let me know in the comments what you think. Just let me know what you think. All right, now, had a question on the national episode, James McCarthy question. He says, I noticed that in some of those pictures that the cars were both left and right-hand drives. Any idea why? I thought American was left-hand driver by the turn of the 20th century. Maybe that is a wrong assumption. To be honest, it is a wrong assumption. At the turn of the 20th century, America was not left-hand drive or right-hand drive. I mean, in fact, so many cars were center drive. I mean, we think of the McLaren F1, ooh, center drive. Well, mind you, the Benz Patent motor wagon was center drive too. The United States didn't become really, left-hand drive oriented until the Model T was solidified, after World War I, and it didn't really start becoming, mandated until, the middle of the 1920s. And so it's that point in time that the United States becomes pretty much left-hand drive. But it wasn't at the turn of the 20th century. At that time, it was anybody's game. Autocar, was the first left-hand drive car. They didn't do that until 1898. So it took a while to catch on. But anywho, next question was on the episode of the first battle car. The JC says, so interesting. He says, with 5.5 tons of weight, it would seem impossible that a less than 20 horsepower engine could move it. I mean, I know you said that they thought it could go 9 miles per hour, but could it really move under all that weight and go 200 miles? Seems impossible. Given the wheels and suspension, I think if it could move, it would only be an on-road vehicle. Do you know if they ever tested it off-road? Well, they did actually. This particular engine, it was a 16 horsepower Daimler, and it was a torquey machine. And there's a reason why it had a transmission that did not have its own reverse gear, is because they had so much gearing for the I mean, this thing basically had 3 granny gears and a first gear. And there just wasn't enough room in the casing to have the reverse on it. So that was just a separate gearing. And it was a 1-to-1. But with that said, when you want to get something moving without a lot of horsepower, that is certainly doable. I mean, you can get a horse-drawn wagon, okay, with the same kind of suspension that was found on that car, load 5.5 or 6 tons of cargo on it, hitch 8 horses to it, and those horses will get that wagon moving. All right, and this thing had 16 horses. It was twice the power of that. So it wasn't a question of whether it could move it, because it could. It was how fast, because when you only have 16 horsepower to work with, if you want it to go fast, you can't have a lot of weight. If you got to have a lot of weight, you've got to gear it way down, and it's going to move slowly. But you can move it, okay? You can go right now to, I remember, as a kid going to the big telescope in San Diego. This thing weighed, in the order of 120 tons, and yet the thing was moved with a 7 horsepower Briggs & Stratton engine, because it was just well balanced enough that you could do that. Now, was this thing well balanced? No, it certainly wasn't. It had a very crude suspension, very crude wheels, yes, but you could move it at 1.5, 2 miles an hour, even if it's not on a road, but if you're going over, as long as it's nothing too ridiculous, I mean, yeah, it would do it, and it was tested for it, and it could do it. It was just too complicated, broke down too much, and wasn't really worth the Army's time, unfortunately. But yeah, they did enjoy it. Okay, some other questions on, these were on the Howard Marmon episode. The first one was, in the vintage era, just how important was it to win a race like the Indy 500? Did it really boost sales for the makers that won the race? In today's world, it seems like a race win does not sway sales much. Well, I beg to differ on your latter comment there. It actually does make a difference, because when companies win races, they do it because they're testing new technology, just like everybody else on the racetrack is. That does get, end up in the production cars. It's still a main method that is used by the automotive industry to develop new production cars. So I think it is important, even today. But back in the day, for that same reason, it was just as important. If you were a race-winning car, especially when cars were new, I mean, what do you want to buy? A car that you haven't heard of because they've never won a race? Or, oh, I've heard of that car, they won that race. It made a big difference when cars were brand new. And so, yeah, it was a big deal to win races at that time. And that's why there were so many different types of races, because if all races were the same, who's just the fastest, well, not all races, there's only going to be so many, winners all the time. What about who's the most agile, who can go the most distance, who can, there were other things that you could, use to prove a car, and that was also done too, in the rallies and the hill climbs and the land speed records and things like this. So there were other ways that was done. Anytime you got press for doing something like that, oh yeah, it was a good thing. And it certainly sold cars. And still does, really. Okay. Also from the same episode on Howard Marmon, this question actually came from Guidor. And he asked, is there any relation to Marmon-Herrington? Oh yeah, there is a relationship. And I didn't get into it. I'm just going to be honest with you. The channel, I've tried to be pretty chronological. I mean, I'm just now even starting to talk about, military cars, and even in that, I'm not talking about World War I yet, and I can tell you right now, hey, spoiler alert, I mean, the next 4 videos are all military ones, but I just haven't talked about them, after, the World War I and what happened afterward yet, because Marmon was a force as a company in the luxury market in the 1920s. And they, like a lot of other companies, did not survive the Depression. Okay, and there were luxury car companies that did survive the Depression, Cadillac, Lincoln, Packard, etc., and there were economy cars that didn't, like Metz and others, but they didn't survive, so they actually merged with Harrington in 1931, got it, and changed their whole business model to go away from making high-end luxury cars and instead made high-end durable trucks and axles and still going on a high-end, but just in a commercial side of things instead of the luxury side of things, and the company's still around today. But I'll be getting into stuff like that. It's going to be a while, because I got a lot of people I got to still talk about. I mean, I'd say probably, the large majority of people I've already talked about on this channel, I've got to readdress, because of what they did during World War I and afterward, and what the companies did. I mean, I still have a lot of work to do on that, so I'll get to them. Don't worry. But yeah, Marmon-Herrington, yeah, they're one and the same. Okay, those were the questions. So, silliness. Well, I think today for silliness, I'm going to do food. There are companies, from, the vintage era and before, that their car makes are sound, well, it's food, okay? Things that all of us eat or some of us eat, and so I'm going to give, I think I got 6 of them here. Yeah, 6 of them. And I'm going to start, from the food I like the least to the like I most. Here are my list of cars that are food. Now, at my least favorite is going to be liver. Now, liver, the car was built in England. They were light cars. From about 1900 through to about 1906. They weren't huge, but liver is important to me because I have quite a story about liver. Because growing up as a child, I have a sister 2 years older, and my sister absolutely would not eat liver, and my mom would make liver quite often, at least once a month, and or maybe once or two. But either way, we had liver enough that we knew about it, and my sister absolutely hated it, and she would pout. Her lower lip would go out, 3 or 4 feet. I'm not gonna eat it. I'm not gonna eat this liver. I'm not gonna eat it. I'm not gonna eat it. I'm not gonna eat it. I hate liver. I'm not gonna eat it. And she would just throw a fit at the dinner table, and I'm sitting, and I'm just eating mine, and I eat my liver, and I say, hey, if she doesn't want hers, I'll eat it. Mind you, she's 2 years older. And of course, Mom and Dad says, no, Billy, you will, she'll have to eat her own liver. And she was, it was always just a thing. Well, I finally, grew up, got out of the house, went in the Navy, and went through boot camp. And when I got out of boot camp, the Navy guys, they said, you're going to they have a weekend now with their family after boot camp. Look, they want pizza. They don't, do anything special. And I got home, and I got into the car, and Mom said, hey, I'm going to make your favorite for you. We're going to come home, and we're going to have liver. And I said, Mom, I hate liver. I have always hated liver. And everybody in the car was like, what? You always loved it. You always wanted it. Says, no, Mom, Dad, Susie, I've always hated liver. I've never liked it. I can't stand liver. But the more I ate it, the more trouble she got into, and that's why I ate it. And that's the only reason why I do not want liver. Do not feed me liver. I can't stand the stuff. So that's my liver story, but that's why liver's the lowest on my list here in these food cars. Okay, next one is going to be Apple. Apple was made in Dayton, Ohio, briefly. 1917, right before World War, America's involvement in World War I. They basically made a cycle car. A few of them didn't really last, but I just don't like raw apples. Apple pie, I'll make it for my wife, but I'm just not an Apple fan. I'm just not. So, sorry. Okay, next one on the list is going to be All Days and Onions. And you know what? I really should do an episode on All Days and Onions because, onions. First of all, I like onion. I don't like raw onions, like on a burger or something like that. But I do like to cook with them. I like a lot of sauces and different things and chilies and things. So I do like onions. And All Days and Onions, British company, 1898, I think they started, last till about 1918, somewhere around there. Mid-range touring car. They made good cars, so I probably really should do an episode about them. But anyway, All Days and Onions, I had to throw them out there. Okay, next one I'm gonna put out there is Eclair. Yeah, I like Eclairs. I don't get them very often, but I do. They are yummy. When I do get them. And of course, Eclair, French car. How could you guess? How can you guess? It was a French car. And they made cycle cars, during the whole cycle car craze, from about 1920 to about 1925 in France, of course. But Eclairs, if I can get, if I find them, once in a while in the bakery section, I'll grab some. Pretty cool. All right. The penultimate food car that I found, I mean, there's other food cars, I just grabbed, these were the ones that really just stood out. Egg, because I like eggs. I mean, who doesn't like eggs? I mean, there are people that don't like eggs, but people are allergic to eggs for that matter. But, I mean, I know, in my house in the morning, we have eggs. I mean, we cook eggs, that's part of breakfast. And egg, of course, Swiss car, one of the very first Swiss cars. Started out about 1898. I think, again, they went, until just after World War I. But another interesting history, maybe worthy of an episode at some point. But eggs, man. Gotta have an egg. And of course, the last on this list, what's the point of eggs without bacon? Yes, there was a vintage car, the Bacon. Now, I'm just going to be straight with here. I mean, they didn't make a whole lot of them. This was an American car. Out of New York, they in 1920, they ended up only making a few of them. It never made it to full production, but it was bacon. It was bacon. It was meat candy. I mean, bacon. It just, yeah, you got eggs and you got bacon. Cars don't get better than that. It's not just for breakfast anymore. Okay, so that's our silliness. Shout out. Now this is a cool shout out. What I've got for you today. Okay, this is Detail Dane. Now what this dude does is he's out in Michigan, and he goes and finds these cars. I mean, barn finds. And we're talking cars, 30, 40, 50 more years old that have just been collecting dust, animals, bugs, whatever, and cleans them up. And it is, I mean, it's a cool channel. Okay, it's cool. It's a cool channel. And he's got some cool cars on it, some pretty interesting ones, as well as some interesting owners that you're going to meet of these cars. And so definitely worth checking out. If you haven't checked it out, link in the description below. And that's what we have today for the Old Garage, and I will see you next time. Peace.